Consulting at the QTI Group. And on behalf of QTI, the Fox Cities Chamber, and Healthy Minds Innovations, I would like to thank you all for joining us today to discuss finding resilience in a time of crisis. We are currently facing unprecedented levels of stress and hardship due to the coronavirus pandemic. Many are wondering how we could possibly stay balanced in the midst of so much change and uncertainty. Fortunately, scientific research suggests that we can train our minds to be calm, focused, and resilient, and that it only takes a few minutes a day to learn simple skills that we can apply in our everyday life. In this webinar, Dr. Cortland Dahl will discuss scientific insights and practical tools that we can use to weather the storm of the current crisis. Now, before I introduce Cort, I would like to invite you to submit any questions you have during today's webinar through Zoom's Q&A functionality. To do so, hover your cursor over the bottom of your screen and select the Q&A icon. You'll then have a chance to type your question, which I will share with Cort at the end of the webinar. And now I'd like to introduce our featured speaker, Dr. Cortland Dahl. Cort is a scientist at UW-Madison's Center for Healthy Minds and the Chief Contemplative Officer at the center's nonprofit partner, Healthy Minds Innovations. His work focuses on theoretical understandings of psychological well-being and the neural and cognitive mechanisms through which well-being can be trained. In addition to his scientific work, Cort has an extensive background in studying contemplative practices, which includes 8 years spent living in Tibetan refugee settlements in India and Nepal, the publication of 12 books of translations of Tibetan meditation manuals, and the co-founding of a global network of meditation centers. Cort is also the creator of the Healthy Minds program, which was recently released as an app to promote well-being in individuals and organizations around the world. Welcome, Cort, and thank you so much for being here today to share this important information with us.
Thank you so much, Summer. Well, first, thank you all for making time in your day for this. If your life is anything like mine, this is just a time of tremendous upheaval and change. It's pretty clear at this point that this is one of these times in human history that is really quite rare, and maybe something that in our entire lifetimes we're not likely to experience, something that is just so disruptive and creates so much hardship and suffering in so many ways for so many people. In fact, I was thinking about it, and even if you think about really horrible times in human history like world wars, it's hard to, I couldn't think of anything where the entire world was disrupted by something on such a vast scale and so quickly. So this is really unprecedented, and it's due to the kind of interconnectedness that exists these days through technology, through travel, and all these different ways, which in many ways benefit us, but in this case have just allowed this kind of disruption to happen on a global scale. So my guess is that all of you in your personal life and probably in your work life as well are feeling this stress, are feeling all of the uncertainty. And from the research that we do and other scientific centers around the world do, we know that this can have profound effects, not only for our psychological well-being and simply having a healthy mind, but even our physical health. When stress overwhelms us, when we just feel really off balance, that also puts our immune system at risk. So this question of how we actually can train our minds, and in some cases even rewire our brains to be more resilient and to flourish is more important than ever. So I just wanted to start with a note of thanks to Summer and QTI for setting this up, and to all of you for making time for this, because it's so important in this day and age. So as Summer mentioned, the work we do at the Center for Healthy Minds is really focused on this question of well-being. And I wanted to start with kind of the human experience of this. So we've probably all had the experience of having a tough day at work or something going on at home, and we lie down in bed and we just want to get a good night's sleep. We might even be exhausted, but yet we sit there staring at the ceiling and we just can't get our mind to shut off. Our body's agitated, our mind's worked up, and we simply can't do the simplest thing in the world, which is to fall asleep. Similarly, we've all had experiences where we had something important to do. It might have been something at home. We wanted to be fully present and attentive to somebody cared about. Or as we see in this image here, we wanted to be getting stuff done at work, but yet our mind was pulled in a million different directions. And it was hard, again, to do the simplest thing in the world, which is just to stay focused on something that's important to us. And also, we've probably all experienced moments in relationships where people that we might, oh, let's see. Sorry, the slides don't seem to be advancing here. Just a moment. Looks like I'm getting some messages that this might not be happening. Hold on just a second. Let me see if I can switch to a different mode here. I'm going to unshare. Okay, let's see if this works. Just a minute. Okay, can you see the slides now? Okay, great. So that itself was a good example of things having a plan and things not going to a plan, and how do we adjust to these changing circumstances. So basically, to recap, there's times where we're lying in bed, we can't get our mind to shut off, we're trying to stay focused at work, and it's just not happening. Our mind is pulled in a million different directions. And as we see in this image here, we can even be with the people we care about most in our lives. And we want to be there for the people we care about. We want to be nurturing, we want to be supportive, and simultaneously we want to be cared for and supported. And yet, even though we want to do these things, it's just not playing out the way we planned. We're not able to be at the top of our game. So it's moments like these where it's not that we don't know what we would like to be happening. We know we would like to be able to let go and relax and sleep. We know we would like to be focused and not distracted. We know we would like to be caring and attentive. But it's almost as though somebody forgot to give us the instruction manual for our own mind, because things are just not going according to plan, and we don't often know what to do in these circumstances. So when we are focused or able to let go, it just seems to kind of happen by accident, but not because we have intentionally done something that has set us up so that that happens. So at the Center for Healthy Minds, our research really centers on these very, very human experiences, very, very human questions. In other words, what are the qualities that help us be resilient in the face of challenges? So in times like this, and it might not be a global crisis like we have right now, but even just a difficult day at home or at work, but certainly when we have a really important global crisis as we have right now, how is it, and what is it in our own minds that makes us more resilient in these moments? And simultaneously, even when things are going okay, it might not be a crisis moment. Things might, be going relatively well. What is it that helps us to be at the top of our game? So when things are going okay, how can it be just more than just so-so or okay? How can we actually be at our best? So what the researchers showed, both our research over decades of work that we've done at the Center for Healthy Minds, specifically looking at how well-being is reflected in the brain and how the brain functions, we have come across 4 important aspects of well-being. Let's see, it looks like we're still having trouble with the slides. Are you seeing the 4 dimensions of well-being slides? Okay, sorry, I don't know what's going on with the slides here. It's just not advancing. Sorry about this, folks. Let me just reshare the screen. Okay, how's that? Are you able to see this slide that says, and help us be at the top of our game? So can you see the slide that's advancing here? 4 dimensions of well-being?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Court.
Okay.
And if you let me know when you advance to the next slide, I can keep you notified if they're advancing. And if we're still having trouble, perhaps we just stay in that non-presenter mode zoomed in.
Yeah, I think we can do that. So let's see if this goes. Sorry about the tech difficulties. I don't know why this is not playing out here. But in any case, why don't I'll just keep going here. And if the slides are impediment, I'll just go to the video mode and we'll stick with that. So in any case, the research that we've done and the research that other scientific centers that study well-being have really started to zero in on 4 important dimensions of well-being that we refer to often as the 4 pillars of well-being, which I'll go through here briefly. But in short, what we're learning is that there are not only these important pillars of well-being, but more importantly, these are things that we can learn. These are skills, you could almost say, that we can train. And they're critical not only to being more resilient, but also to being at the top of our game when things are going relatively well. So the first of these is awareness. Simply put, this is the capacity to know what is happening in our own mind, and especially to be able to regulate our own attention. So let's see here. It looks like the slides are still not showing up. I'm just going to switch back to video mode. Apologies for this, everyone. Okay, so I think I'll just stick with the video here. Okay, so sorry about that. All my well-prepared slides are going to sit in the background here, and you'll just be stuck with me, so I hope that's okay. We can, I think what we'll do here is I'll export these as a PDF, and we'll send it out to all the participants, so you'll get to see some of the images and things we were going to show.
And Court, one other idea, if I may, we could see when you were clicking through your slides, when you were in the editable view or the non-presenter view. So if you want to share and just click through your slides in that way, that might work as well.
Yeah, that might not, yeah, let's try that.
Thanks for being resilient with us today.
Yeah, this is exactly the point of our research. Life does not go according to plan, and how do we handle all of this?
Yes, absolutely.
Perfect in the moment example of this. So let's see here. How's that? Can you see that?
Yes, we can see that. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Test clicking up at 1 or down. That would be helpful. We can make sure it's going to work. Perfect. Yep, this is great. Thank you so much.
We'll do it old school here. All right. So, as I mentioned, we have these 4 pillars of well-being, and these are the keys to resilience. So I'll just go through these really quickly here, and then we'll do a little bit deeper dive and do some experiential exercises so you have a sense of what we're talking about. So simply put, awareness is the capacity to know what is happening in our own mind. Things like mindfulness, the ability to regulate our attention, the ability to simply stay focused and not be pulled off endlessly by distractions. Similarly, connection, also skills that we can train. And these are the skills, the qualities that help us to build and maintain healthy relationships. And even with people we don't know that well, people we might just routinely interact with on a daily basis, how can we set ourselves up so our routine interactions that we have with people throughout the day feel supportive and positive rather than tense or difficult or challenging? So that's this element or pillar of connection. Insight is one that's really coming out of the world of psychotherapy. And we oftentimes historically thought of these as things that can help people who are really experiencing a lot of mental distress. But now we're now seeing that these are basic skills that can help us build a flexible, adaptable, resilient sense of self. And in particular, the capacity to really have a curious, open attitude towards one's own mind and experience. So for example, being able to step back and observe our thoughts, our emotions, and to start to see how these shape our sense of self and even shape how we see the world and how we experience things. So that's this dimension of insight. And finally, purpose is simply feeling that our life and how we live our life is meaningful, that we feel connected to what really matters to us, to our deeply held values and beliefs, and we can keep those front and center throughout our day. So all of these, most importantly, although we oftentimes think of these things as simply that they happen sometimes and that other times they don't, we can actually train ourselves to have more awareness, to reconnect in a healthy way with other people, and similarly to have more insight and purpose. So let's take a moment now to experience something. If you'll indulge me for a minute, let's do a short exercise and just see how this goes. Take a moment to close your eyes if you like. Find a comfortable posture. And notice the movement of your breath. Take a few slow, deep breaths. And notice how it feels as the air moves in and out of your body. Now I want you to do something very simple here. Continue to pay attention to your breath and see if you can notice when your mind starts to wander off, when you get pulled away from the breath, and just see if you can notice a moment of distraction or even the tendency toward distraction. So we'll do this for a few moments. Okay, you can open your eyes slowly. So you just did actually a quite important practice. You practiced a very important skill. So part of what just happened there in this seemingly very, very simple exercise of bringing awareness to your breath, you did two very important things. One is you were training your attention. Our attention is always pointed towards something, but usually we're not choosing what to pay attention to. It's impulse or habit. And sometimes they might be good habits. Sometimes we can stay focused, and it's because we've built up a good habit over time. But in any case, whether we're focused or distracted, it's usually just habit that is in control. So here you practice the skill of paying attention on purpose. The other skill you practiced, you might have noticed that your mind was wandering off from time to time. That is the skill of mindfulness, the skill of simply knowing what's going on in your own mind. So in this case, you might have noticed the pull of distraction. In another case, you might be, if you practice the skill, it might be you notice that an emotional reaction is occurring. And before it catches you, before you get swept away by the emotional reaction, you're able to notice it. You're able to bring awareness to it. And that almost short circuits the whole cascade of thoughts and emotions that creates reactivity, that leads to feeling overwhelmed, to feeling reactive, and to these moments where we really struggle in life. So you can actually probably see it on the screen here. So this normally I would have asked you to see how distracted you think we are. But as you can see on the screen here, there's really good scientific research that shows across thousands of participants, there's some really large study that was done a number of years ago, that showed that we are distracted 47% of our waking life. So I want you just to let that sink in for a second. Almost half of your waking life, and everybody you know, if you're like the average person, almost half of your life is spent not paying attention to what you're doing or to who you're with. So that is incredibly powerful in terms of how it affects everything from the quality of our relationships, because that means when we're having a conversation, when we're sitting at the dinner table, when we're trying to be there for someone we care about, half the time our mind is wandering off. It means that half the time at work when we're trying to get stuff done, our mind is getting pulled in different directions. So this really impacts just about everything of our life. And historically, we had a lot of things, although this was probably always a challenge for us as humans, we had a lot of things in our life that helped us come back to what is happening in the here and now, and times in our day that would be centering times, times when we get brought back into where we are and who we're with, and not in the endless flow of thoughts. And something as simple as kids, and I have a teenage son, and it's been interesting to watch him grow up. Sorry, just a second here. That even how kids are being raised in the environment these days is really changing. So if you imagine kids playing outside, it would have been one of these things that helps kids and helps us as we grow and learn, helps us to be really fully present in the moment. Something like climbing a tree or playing tag, the simplest thing in the world. But now, do you imagine what kids are doing more and more? You see images like this. Even being out in nature, we are pulled into our heads and into our devices. So this is not getting better. In fact, these challenges we've always faced are getting much harder. And scientifically, we know that we're seeing a huge surge in depression, in anxiety, in stress and overwhelm. And it's certainly in large part due to the role that technology plays. So these skills are incredibly important these days. So mindfulness, which again, I mentioned just a moment ago, and what you practiced a moment ago, is simply the skill of knowing what is happening in your own mind. And as it says here, what the science shows is that this capacity to be mindful and aware, is the key to self-regulation. It's the key to managing thoughts and emotions. It's the key to managing our impulses and our behavior, and even to habits, even to letting go of old habits, bad habits that might not be serving us well, and building positive, healthy habits. So these days, I've noticed with all the pandemic information, the news, everything that's going on all the time, it is so easy to just get pulled into this swirl of thoughts and fear and anxiety and uncertainty. So this, in many ways, is the antidote to all of that. It helps us be back in the driver's seat of our own minds. So the news feed or the conversation and all of the uncertainty is not sweeping us away. So it's a critical piece of well-being, but it has all of these really, really important real world impacts, again, on everything from our relationships and our health behaviors to how we show up at work. So this is going to be a key to productivity, to how engaged we are at work, and just how good we feel about what we're doing and how we do it at work. So I wanted to show one study here that really illustrates this point. And unfortunately, I can't click through the slides, but I'll just give you the highlights here, which you can see. So we did, one of the pivotal studies that we did here at the Center for Healthy Minds was looking at how the brain experiences pain. And also what happens when we train the mind through meditation practice, like the one you just did. Can we actually change the way that the brain functions so that we relate to pain in a more healthy, balanced way? And what you can see here is that we had two different groups. We had meditators and we had non-meditators. And to make a long story short here, the way we put people in the brain scanner, and everybody experienced a painful stimulus. In this case, it was a little box on the wrist that would pipe in hot water, and it was scalding hot. It really, really hurt. I actually did this myself, so I can personally testify that it really, really hurt. And people would get, let's see. So people would get this painful stimulus, and they would know 10 seconds ahead of time that they were going to get burned. And what we can see from the non-meditator group, if you purely look at the brain as these painful experiences are happening, the non-meditators, when they get the warning that they're going to get burned in 10 seconds, immediately the brain gets kicked into overdrive. And so they are essentially suffering before the pain has even happened. So this brain activity is not just in any brain region, it's in the pain network. So the pain network of the brains of these non-meditators was getting all amped up even before the pain arrived. And then you can see after the pain ends, there's a very slow recovery. It takes a while for this network in the brain, the pain network in the brain, to slowly go back down to its normal baseline level. The meditators, however, you can see a very different pattern of activity. You don't see all of this amped up suffering that happens before the pain. You rather see the pain network activate when the pain actually occurs. So it's not as though the meditators didn't experience the pain, they did. And then again, after the pain ends, it just goes right back down very rapidly to its baseline levels. So what this shows in the research is that we essentially can train our mind to disentangle pain from suffering. Now here it's physical pain, but it could just as well have been emotional pain or any kind of pain. We tend to think that they go together, that if we have that pain, we automatically are going to suffer. But when we asked the meditators about how intense the pain was, it was about the same as the non-meditators. But when we asked them how unpleasant was it, how much were you suffering when you experienced the pain, they rated it as much less unpleasant. So they had the pain, but without all the suffering. So what you can see from this, and this is something we did in the lab and have people in the scanners, but this is exactly the quality that as we are navigating this really challenging time that we have right now, this is the capacity to be able to let go and to return to a state of balance and equilibrium, even when we have something very challenging going on. It doesn't tune out the pain, it helps us deal with it without adding layers and layers of anxiety and fear and sadness and anger, whatever all of that emotional swirl might be. It just slowly helps us decrease the volume of all of that so we can navigate it in a healthy, balanced way. So Tanya just asked a question here asking, how do we practice mindfulness and be more digitally disconnected during a time like this? So employers are regularly expecting employees to be on 24/7, and the line between work and home is even more blurred. So I myself have experienced this as well, and I think we all are. So it's a great question. Part of what I do, and at the Center for Healthy Minds and Healthy Minds Innovations we do as well, is create time in our day to unplug and to simply be, to let go of all the doing that is there all the time. And we even do this in meetings. Oftentimes we have, through the Healthy Minds program that we mentioned earlier, we actually will begin meetings with a short practice. It might be a few moments of mindfulness like we did earlier, or later I'll tell you a little bit about connection, insight, and purpose practices, but just making more space in our lives to let go of all the swirl in our minds and just to come back to this present moment. So that's one very simple thing we can do, is just have mindful pauses. Even if it's a few moments, 5 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, just pause for a few moments, take a few mindful breaths, and then go back to whatever you're doing with a little bit more awareness, a little bit more centered, grounded attention. So this doesn't have to be some long meditation session. You can actually do this in the midst of whatever you're doing, just a few mindful breaths, reconnecting with your body and checking in. So that can be a very simple thing you can do, and it really makes a difference. So Helen also asked us, is the application the same for children? So we actually have done research with kids, even pre-K, showing that very small children can learn these practices. A simple practice to do is something, to do something at the dinner table, where you just pause for a few moments before dinner and just all be together. Say, let's take a few mindful breaths together and let's reconnect with ourselves and with each other, and then be fully present. Put the technology away, like leave the phones off, like don't even bring them to the dinner table, and just simply be there with each other, make a few moments to reconnect in that way. So that same mindful pause can be really great to do as a family or to do with kids as part of the day. And I would recommend, having done this with my own son since he's now 14, is to do little things when everything is going fine. Don't wait till there's a big temper tantrum or emotional upheaval. Just have moments of mindfulness throughout the day so it becomes a normal thing. And it could be very simple and very short. And then, having gotten used to it, you can bring it into a moment of difficulty, whether it's a child or even for us personally. So that's just one simple skill. To boil that down to the very, very simplest form, it's just that idea of a mindful pause and sprinkling these moments of mindful awareness throughout your day. And over time, if you treat that as a skill, that will slowly filter into your conversation. So you'll start to be more present and aware with the people you're with. It'll make you more aware of your emotional state. So we don't get so easily caught up in our emotions and our thoughts. And of course, when we're just getting stuff done at work, it's what helps us stay focused and on track. So these really, really important skills. So let's move on now to healthy connections. And I thought we'd start again with a very simple practice, just to give you a sense of the experience here. So again, if you'll indulge me, take a moment to close your eyes. If you find it more natural, you can leave your eyes gently open, whatever feels more natural. Take that mindful pause now. Take a few slow, deep breaths. Notice how your body feels as you breathe. And now bring someone to mind that you have a warm, caring relationship with. Doesn't really matter who it is, just somebody who you naturally feel a sense of connection with. And think of something that you really appreciate about this person. It could be a quality they have, a skill, anything, just something you appreciate. And now imagine expressing your appreciation. What would you say or do to let this person know how you feel? And imagine what it might be like for them to really feel seen, to feel appreciated and cared for. So just imagine what that would actually be like. Now imagine what they might appreciate about you. What would they say if I asked the same question to them? What quality, what skill, what would they say? What would they appreciate about you? Okay, you can slowly open your eyes. I'm curious if any of you want to just share in the chat box who you brought to mind, or what quality you thought about, or what came to mind. Feel free to just type something in there if you want to share a little bit. It could just be brief, a word or two. What we just did there, again, is a skill. We biologically, for evolutionary reasons, have what you might call a negativity bias. Oh, it's great. I see a few people saying you thought about your father, your son, your daughter, spouse, granddaughter. Snuggling with my spouse, that's sweet. Creativity, yeah. So the simplest thing in the world that we just did, it's just taking the moment to notice something positive. And as I mentioned, biologically, we have a negativity bias. We are hardwired to notice threats, to notice things that are out of the norm, to focus on what's different or what's changing. And historically, over the course of our evolution, this is the very stuff that has helped us survive. So it's not a bad thing. This is actually critical for our survival. But in the modern world, we are oftentimes not facing any kind of mortal threat like that. But we emotionally respond. It's almost as though our body can't distinguish between an existential threat to our survival and an emotional threat. So because of that, we oftentimes get hyper-focused on the negative, and there's biological reasons why we do this. But as you just all shared here, sharing something about creativity, or my 91-year-old friend's positivity, or my best friend and his emotional balance. So things like this, all you just did right there is simply noticed something nice. Simplest thing in the world. So imagine if you treated that as a skill. In any situation you were in, whenever you walked in the room with somebody, you had trained yourself to attune to something positive, to notice something positive about the people you're with, or even a situation. Even if you're not with other people, you walk out the door. In fact, I was doing a practice like this the other day. I live in South Madison, and I was just going for a walk, and I was doing a guided practice, an appreciation practice. And I just looked around and I saw all the trees, the neighbors and everything. And it was like I was seeing it all with fresh eyes. There was just a sense of warmth and connection. And it was simply through what you all just did, just notice something positive. So when you do that, this is an example of one simple skill that immediately helps us feel a sense of connection to ourselves, to the people we're with, to the places we are. We just feel a supportive sense of connection. And this is a skill. So again, if you imagine training in this, imagine what a gift that is. It feels good to us. It creates a burst of positive emotions when we feel that appreciation, but it is such a gift to feel that to other people. So imagine if you say something to your friend, I so admire your emotional balance. It's so inspiring to me that you're so grounded. Or, to saying to your son, you are so creative, and that's such a gift you have. I love that about you. It feels good to us, and it feels good to other people to be seen and respected and appreciated in that way. So it's incredibly powerful, but also really simple. It's just a simple skill that we can practice. So on the flip side of that, there are such huge consequences for isolation. And these days, the risk of feeling isolated is so intense. So you can see here that this is long before the pandemic occurred, but just generally, what science shows is that loneliness and isolation is toxic. It has huge consequences for our well-being, and it also has huge consequences for our physical health. And I noticed something, actually I've noticed a number of experiences in recent days that really just personally showed me how at risk we are for this these days. So there was one experience I had where I went to a grocery store and it was almost empty. I was at the Pick and Save on Park Street, actually. Some of you probably know this, you probably go there. And I just was walking down the grocery aisle. And there weren't many people there, but I turned into an aisle and there was a family, like a 5-year-old kid and a young husband and wife. And I immediately, because this was like maybe in the first few days after the lockdown, and we were only going out to get groceries. And I immediately felt this contraction. And I saw them as a threat. I immediately thought, oh, what if I'm going to walk through contaminated air and breathe contaminated air? Now, normally, if I had seen a family like that, I would have looked at that kid. It would have reminded me of my own son when he was that age. I would have felt warmth and connection. But in this moment, I immediately felt disconnected. I felt alienation. I felt like I wanted to turn around and walk the other way. And it took me consciously noticing that feeling of disconnection, that feeling of alienation, and choosing to reconnect. So actually noticing, it took a conscious choice to notice, oh, here's this family, and they want to be safe and healthy too. They're out going and getting groceries and have the same fear and uncertainty that I have. And so although I felt that disconnect, by making a different choice and training in this simple skill, immediately felt that sense of connection again, rather than a feeling of threat and alienation. I've had similar experiences just walking around my neighborhood and seeing my neighbors and feeling like I want to cross over to the street. And even if we do cross over the street, because we do need to physically keep our distance, we can do that while still feeling connected. In other words, we can physically keep our distance while mentally and emotionally still feeling like we're close. And that's, I think, a critical skill in these really challenging times. So I'll just say something very, very brief here about some of the science. I won't go into too in depth here. But you can see as humans that we have these innate capacities that we're born with. So here, you could say that there is this capacity we have to feel empathy. When we're with somebody that is having a hard day or having a good day, it can be positive too, we resonate. It's almost like we start vibrating at their frequency. So we can see here two little babies. One baby starts crying, and then the other baby starts crying. So that is empathy. We also can feel apathy. Here we have a baby crying, and then another baby who just doesn't seem to really care that much, right? And we almost train ourselves culturally to feel apathy. If you imagine just the experience of listening to the news, we are confronted with suffering all the time, and we kind of learn just to tune it out. So we learn to feel apathy, to shut it out, and to simply shut out the suffering. But we also have this incredibly beautiful and uplifting and motivating quality to feel compassion. So here you can see that there's enough empathy that this baby here in the middle can recognize that the other baby's suffering. But it's not eliciting just the distress. They're not both crying. It's eliciting care. It's eliciting concern. And when we feel compassion in this way, rather than this experience, empathy can be depleting and overwhelming. But compassion actually is energizing. It's a state of confidence and being uplifted and feeling motivated. So again, what the science shows is that we can actually train ourselves to shift from empathic overwhelm into compassion, from a state of distress to a state of inspired motivation. So one very simple way to do that, and again, I've been doing this a lot these days, is simply to notice this shared desire we all have to be safe, to be healthy, to be free from suffering and hardship, and just to notice that common ground, however different we might seem on the surface, and we might be on the surface. We all want to be safe. We all want to be healthy right now. So when we notice that in other people, and we can extend our own desire to be safe and healthy and happy, we can extend that to them as well. Immediately we're in this space of compassion. We're in this state of confident, inspired motivation, where even if it's just an attitude, we are ready and willing to help if that's what the situation calls for, versus the state of empathy where we might just be overwhelmed, and that's kind of it. So again, these are just skills that we can train. And again, to show some of the science here without getting into weeds about it, we can see that empathy and compassion, one of the big insights scientifically from the neuroscience in this area, is that empathy and compassion are completely different networks in the brain. And the empathy network is much more linked to feelings of negative emotions like stress, being overwhelmed, being anxious, whereas compassion is linked to networks in the brain where we feel social connectedness, we feel positive emotions, we feel uplifted, we feel inspired. So it's actually not only different in terms of how we experience it, but even in the brain, this is different, and we can train ourselves. So again, this is just a little bit about compassion. Let me skip through maybe just the key point here, which I think is really critical these days, is that we're having to keep our distance, in some cases, even from people we really care about. But yet we don't need to let that physical distance create a sense of mental, emotional distance. We can still feel deeply, deeply connected, even while physically apart. And this is, again, vitally important in this current circumstance we're in. So let's go on to insight. So we talked about awareness briefly. We talked about connection and the skills like appreciation and compassion that help us feel connected. So insight, this third pillar of a healthy mind, this third pillar of well-being, is really the quality of having a healthy, flexible, adaptable sense of self. And the key to this, really the key to this aspect of insight and having a flexible, healthy sense of self, is the willingness to be curious, to be open, and to inquire into your own inner experience. So this is what people oftentimes learn in therapy. And again, I kind of mentioned it's sort of an unfortunate cultural occurrence that therapy has really kind of viewed oftentimes as something that you only do when you're really struggling. These, scientifically, we're seeing that these are skills that really everybody should be learning. We should be learning this stuff as kids. So for example, the capacity to see how our emotions and thoughts are shaping how we see a situation. Again, these days, we can turn on the news or read our news feed, and immediately our mind is spinning with all sorts of fearful thoughts. Those fearful thoughts shape how we see other people. And how we see other people, that then has this ripple effect in our well-being, our physical health. All of these ripple effects play out simply from not really seeing clearly how our thoughts and emotions are shaping our experience. So there's really fascinating science in this area, and I won't go into too much depth here, but it's really, really interesting. Some of the most interesting science we've seen is actually in political theory and looking at political beliefs. And I'm always reminded of having conversations at Thanksgiving and over the holidays with my family, where we get into politics, and somehow we never learn the same lessons, which is, it's probably just not a good idea to get into political conversations. And all of us, everybody involved, we all think we have the right view and we have the right opinion. So what we usually think about ourselves is that our views on things are really based on evidence, and then we think about them very carefully, a lot of deep thought, and then based on that evidence and our careful consideration, we form our view or our opinion or our belief. What the science shows actually is that in the vast majority of cases, that's actually not what's happening at all. And it's a little humbling to know this about ourselves. Usually we actually start with our kind of gut sense of what we think is happening. And then we don't go into some careful analysis. We then actually cherry pick the evidence that supports the view and the feeling we already had. So we screen out, in fact, there's really good evidence that we actually screen out information that disconfirms our belief. And then based on that, we then have our opinion. We have our gut view, we cherry pick the evidence, and then that's our view. We even know that this actually is reflected at the brain level. So we get locked in a view of things. And actually what happens is this back and forth between the thinking mind and emotion, and it becomes this loop. And when we're in an argument, for example, we really are just completely tuning out. We're not even listening to other people anymore. We're just listening to our own inner monologue, and we become closed off for this. So in any case, the point of this, why does this actually matter for well-being? Well, it matters for well-being because a lot of times what we're doing in our lives is we have beliefs about ourselves. We have views and opinions, oftentimes unconscious, about our relationships, about situations, about our sense of self. And all of that dramatically impacts how flexible and resilient we are. So if we go back to the images that I showed at the beginning, this moment of lying in bed and not being able to shut our mind off, and just our mind churning with thoughts, our body worked up and agitated, or a moment like this where we're arguing and we just can't let go. So regardless of where we are, what's going on in the brain in those moments is we're just caught in this loop in the mind between thoughts and emotions. And that then really impacts our body. It gets the stress response going in our body. So being able to step back and get curious, not with a sense of judgment or trying to say, what's good or bad or right and wrong, but just simply being able to step back and see that we are having thoughts and emotions, and we can see that they are shaping the way we're seeing things in the moment. That, again, is a vitally important skill. So the key take home here is that when we treat this as a skill, and a very simple way to do this is just to pause. You can kind of build on that idea of a mindful pause. You can step back and say, what am I thinking and feeling right now? What thoughts are swirling through my mind in this particular situation? When we can do that, it essentially opens us up. We are closed when we're just caught in our thoughts and emotions, but when we can observe them and examine them, we become open. It's a state of curiosity. And that allows for new perspectives. It allows for change. It allows us to adapt. It allows us even to learn and grow from even challenging situations. And this, of course, is what then makes us resilient. It makes it easier for us to deal with all of these challenging situations. So again, these are simple skills that we can train in the Healthy Minds program, which we talked about earlier. These are a lot of the skills that we train through this training. So I'll do the final one and then see if there might be a few minutes left for some Q&A. So the last one, and this is actually, there's an overwhelming amount of scientific evidence for the importance of this particular one, which is all around meaning and purpose. So again, let's just do a very short exercise to give you a sense of what this feels like as a skill. So take a moment again to close your eyes or just relax your gaze if that feels more comfortable. Take a few slow, mindful breaths. Feel the air as it moves in and out of your body. And now bring to mind a situation in the past that was challenging, but that you handled really well. Maybe not perfectly, but just something that was difficult, but somehow you managed to deal with it in a healthy way. See if you can find something like that. And once you've found something, see if you can pinpoint an important personal value that helped you get through it, that maybe was one of the reasons why you handled it or how you handled it in a good way. So see if you find a core value that helps you be more resilient. Okay, so you can again open your eyes if they were closed. So feel free to, if you want to put something in the chat box here, what value that you noticed. And again, it could be anything. It could be kindness, could be creativity, it could be integrity, it could be honesty. It doesn't really matter what the value was or is, but the skill here, so Stephanie wrote respect. So great, exact, perfect value. So what we just did here, if you boil this down to the idea of this being a skill, fairness, Mary wrote about fairness. What we just did as a skill is clarify an important personal value. And what we can do if we, in daily life, is we just keep those front and center in our mind. So the first skill is to clarify important personal values. The second skill is then to apply them, to keep them front and center so they guide how we are navigating our situations. So in that case, you might take that same skill that you just identified a few moments ago, and then think about where we are now. So again, some of you are typing in great ones: respect, fairness, family is a priority, perseverance. And then you can apply that now. So we are facing adversity now. We're all facing adversity right now. How can perseverance, how can I use this as an opportunity to strengthen this quality, this value of perseverance? How can I use it to make fairness front and center? How can fairness be a lens that I can use to look at this present challenging situation? So we clarify the value, or we clarify a deep sense of purpose, and then we apply it. We use it as a lens through which we can view our life and all the challenges that we might have. So typically when we normally think of meaning and purpose, our kind of gut level response to that is oftentimes to think or to ask ourselves a question like this: how can I do more things that are meaningful? And it's easy to start thinking we need to be living some other life than the one that we often have. But I don't know about you, but these days there's not a lot of flexibility in how I'm spending my time. I've got work, I've got family, I can squeeze in a little exercise, a little meditation, but there's not a lot of wiggle room. I'm not gonna go, in some spending hours and hours every day volunteering or doing something like that. There's not oftentimes a lot of flexibility. What the science is showing and what we can think about more as a practice is to ask a very different question. So not how can I do more things that are meaningful, but rather how can I find more meaning in the things I already do? So we can't always control what we're doing. We certainly can't control when challenges happen and when they don't. But what we can control, what we always have the opportunity to have influence over, is our perspective. So if you take something just very routine and mundane, like doing the dishes here, so this is the most mundane thing you could practically imagine. But again, take something, even some of the values that some of you shared: fairness, family is a priority, perseverance, respect. Any one of these, actually, you could use as a lens to view this aspect of doing the dishes. So for example, do the dishes with a sense of fairness. Like, okay, I'm going to do my part here, recognizing what other people are doing to support me, and I'm going to do something so I can support them, to embody fairness. Or maybe you do the dishes as an act of generosity. So it doesn't change what you're doing, but it's changing how you're doing it, and it's changing how you view the situation. And what the science shows is that this makes a tremendous difference in helping us deal with adversity. So there was a study, for example, that showed college students, if you take just their normal work and you you train them to think about it in terms of a big picture value, something that's going to be of benefit to the world, it actually not only made them more resilient, made them have better, more perseverance, but they were more likely to graduate when they had this training. So it improved not only how they felt about what they were doing, but even just the very real world academic performance. So these are really, really critical skills. So we're just at the time here. So just want to kind of wrap things up and reiterate some of the key points here. So here, with purpose and meaning, like these other pillars of well-being, connecting to a sense of purpose and meaning, even with something as routine as doing the dishes or going for a walk or these small moments of life, they are deeply rewarding and nourishing, and they also make us more resilient. So if we bring all of these together, there's a lot, this is a lot of ground we've covered in these 60 minutes, but just to boil down to some very, very simple skills, almost you can think of as daily rituals. One is to make a habit of having short moments of mindfulness throughout your day. It could be a formal meditation practice if that's something you find helpful. It's been a huge part of my life, something that's been really, really helpful and rewarding. But it could be something as simple as just mindful moments throughout your day. Just taking a few mindful breaths like we've done over this past hour. Another one that we practice is really the skill of appreciation. Make a habit of noticing one good thing, one nice thing about whoever you're with and whatever you're doing. That slowly over time will get easier and easier until the point where you don't even think about it. You just naturally notice the positive about yourself, about others, and about situations. The third, relating to insight, a simple skill you can practice, is just to notice what thoughts and emotions are occurring in any given moment, and to start to get curious about how they're shaping your experience. So just notice your thoughts and emotions, and then ask, oh, what's going on here? How is this informing or shaping how I see myself or this situation? So again, a very simple skill. And then finally, with purpose, a simple thing we can do is try to reconnect with the underlying or deeper why that guides what we do in our life. And here I mean not just the superficial why, I need to do the dishes because my kitchen is messy, but I want to wash the dishes and clean the dishes so my family has a clean home and I want them to feel cared for. So find an inspiring motivation, a deeper why for all of the things that you do in your life. So in short, awareness, connection, insight, purpose, they are all skills. These change the brain in very important ways. And in times like this, they are the key to resilience. And they have very, very important effects on how we live our lives and how we can deal with really challenging times, both at home and also at work. So maybe I'll pass it back to you, Summer. We're just at the end of time here, so we're right at the time. But
well, thank you so much, Court. On behalf of QTI and Fox Cities Chamber, this was excellent information. I really appreciate you and Healthy Minds Innovations for graciously sharing these helpful insights. Healthy Minds Innovations is a nonprofit with a vision of a kinder, wiser, and more compassionate world. And I know that I personally have enjoyed using their free Healthy Minds program available through the App Store. To learn more about how you can support their noble vision or bring their offerings to your daily life or to your organization, I invite you to visit their website or Facebook page. Please watch for our email with a copy of today's presentation along with a link to the recording. You'll also find additional webinar recordings, articles, and other helpful resources on QTI's COVID-19 webpage. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and be well.
Thanks, everyone.